I have two memories of Hiroshima. One is a memory of my hometown Hiroshima, where I lived the first 23 years of my life. When I return to Hiroshima, I often take a streetcar ride, but not as a way of going to somewhere in the city. Riding the streetcar brings my childhood memories back. It is a nostalgic journey that traces memories of places, school friends, activities, and the rush hours when the street would fill with the people going to work and school. Changes to the cityscape sometimes makes it difficult to recall parts of the city as they were many years ago. Over 40 years have passed since I left my hometown. The other memory is about Hiroshima that was changed forever by the atomic bombing. I was born 6.5 years after the Hiroshima bombing, so this is not my direct memory. Rather, it is through my imagination that I remember. On the streetcar, the stop announcement reminds me the streets and towns that are familiar. But sometimes I cannot help but imagine what these streets and towns were like on the day Hiroshima was bombed. My streetcar ride often becomes an emotional experience of two memories of Hiroshima overlapping one another, one of which is my own and the other through my imagination. Hiroshima today does not have a trace of the destruction brought by the atomic bombing at the end of the World War II. Getting off a streetcar at the stop Genbaku-Dobumae, the skeletal ruins of the former Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotional Hall come into view. This building's frame is known as Atomic Bomb Dome and stands as a stoic eyewitness of history. The original building was the Hiroshima Prefectural Commercial Hall, designed by the Czech architect Jan Lecho, which opened in 1915 on the bank of the Motoyasu River. The European-style building with an oval-shaped dome was a landmark. In 1933, the building was renamed the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, and it was the pride of the city. On the morning of August 6, 1945, atomic bomb exploded over the city of Hiroshima. The Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall stood only about 160 meters away from the hypocenter. At the close range, the powerful blast and the heat rays from the explosion destroyed and burned the building to the ground, with only the oval-shaped dome and the skeleton of the building remaining. People of Hiroshima began to call it the A-bomb dome in the 1950s. The A-bomb dome is today a symbol of the Hiroshima, the first city to suffer the impact of the atomic bomb in human history. It stands as a testimony of the threat and the misery of atomic bombing. The A-bomb dome resembles aging hibakusha, atomic bomb survivors, who are now getting fragile but remain stoic to keep the legacy of Hiroshima from fading away. I have two places I always visit when I return to Hiroshima: the cemetery where my mother rests and the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. The park, located in the delta between the Motoyasu River and the Honkawa River, is dedicated for the legacy of Hiroshima and the memories of the atomic bomb direct and indirect victims. The location of the park was once the city's busiest downtown commercial and residential district. The area was a home to about 4,000 residents. Because of its very close proximity to the hypocenter, shops, inns, houses, temples, movie theaters, and the other buildings were all destroyed and burned down. The residents and the people in the area were all annihilated instantly. Every year, on the anniversary of the bombing, the Peace Memorial ceremony is held in the park. I was probably 7 or 8 years old when my mother took me to the ceremony for the first time. Since then, until I left Hiroshima at the age of 23, I had annually attended the ceremony with my mother. For my mother, attending the ceremony meant a proof of her survival each year since the fatal day of the bombing. During the ceremony, she was overwhelmed with the memory of that day. Thinking back to her survival and the living afterward, when the ceremony ended, she always said to herself quietly, "Mata 1年生かされた." I was let to live another year. Although I was young, I felt the weight of the word, and I remember her word somehow made me sad. The year of 1995 marked the 50th anniversary of Hiroshima bombing. My mother became a hibakusha at an age 17. And then I am a hibaku nisei, second generation atomic bomb survivor. The year of 1995 was the year I was reassured what hibaku nisei means. I and my mother together attended the ceremony as we used to do. After the ceremony, we walked to the place where my mother was exposed to the atomic bombing. We stood on the exact spot where my mother jumped into Honkawa River to escape the fierce fire. Near the center of the Peace Memorial Park is located the cenotaph for the victims of the atomic bomb. Inside, registries. They contain the names of all known victims of the bombing. Names are added to those registries each year. My mother's name was entered in the registries in 2003. Many visitors come to the park all year round. Many of them stop in front of the cenotaph to show their respect to the victims. The nearby residents enjoy their morning walk in the park, and some walkers stop and bow in front of the cenotaph. My visit to the cenotaph since my mother passed away became like visiting her second cemetery. And then I treasure my silent conversation with my mother, which makes me think about her life as a hibakusha. Monday morning on August 6, 1945, the midsummer temperature had already risen. People in Hiroshima were about to begin their day. At 8:15 a.m., the B-29 bomber Enola Gay released Little Boy, a uranium bomb, aiming at the T-shaped Aioi Bridge. 43 seconds later, The bomb exploded 600 meters above the sky, with a blinding flash creating a fireball just like a small sun. The fireball's surface temperature was 7,700 degrees Celsius. The ground temperature of the hypocenter rose to 3,000 to 4,000 degrees Celsius. At the time of the explosion, fierce heat rays and the radiation burst out in every direction, creating a super powerful blast. The mushroom cloud resulting from the atomic bombing rose up to an altitude of 10,000 meters. People sustained severe burns from the heat rays emitted from the fireball. Within 1 kilometer from the hypocenter, people had also their internal organs damaged from the direct exposure to the intense heat rays. The force of the blast collapsed buildings in an instant. Almost all wooden houses within 2 to 3 kilometers of the hypocenter were completely destroyed. Concrete buildings remained standing, but they were severely damaged with the windows shattered and the interiors were destroyed by fire. People were lifted and hurled in the air by the blast, knocked unconscious, severely injured, trapped under the collapsed buildings, or crashed to death. The blast also blew people's burned clothing to tatters and peeled the burned skins off to hanging in strips. The intense heat rays caused houses and anything combustible in the city center to burst into flames, and the fires quickly spread out of control. Within 2 kilometers of the hypocenter, almost everything was burned to ashes. The fierce fires peaked between 10 a.m. and 2 to 3 p.m., and the fire continues to burn the city intensely all day long. Countless people were trapped under the falling buildings, and they burned alive. The intense and large-scale fire reduced Hiroshima to a city of ashes. The city of Hiroshima disappeared. The devastation under the mushroom cloud was nothing but hell. People's Monday morning routines were suddenly transformed to a chaotic situation. The city was engulfed in the intense firestorm, and the people were chased by raging flames. The encroaching flames consumed the people screaming for help in desperate pain, and then chased people to the rivers to escape the flames. Among the people fleeing from the inferno, some collapsed by the riverbanks, some jumped into the rivers, but their desperate attempt to escape was overwhelmed by the exhaustion, and their bodies were washed away. The rivers in Hiroshima were flooded with countless corpses. Charred bodies beyond recognition lay everywhere. Yoko Ota, a Japanese writer who survived atomic bombing, called the city of Hiroshima City of Corpses. All day long, badly injured people were moving wordlessly toward the outskirts to escape from the city. Their clothes were ripped to shreds and soaked in blood. Many people were almost naked with swollen faces. The peeler of skins were hanging down like pieces of rag. The wretched figures, with their hands lifted half up, no longer resembled human beings. They were ghosts in procession. Water Water, water, please. Dying or severely injured people, with what sounded like their last gasps, asked for water. Countless people crowded into the fire cisterns placed around the city. They drank and died. The sight of the piled corpses in the fire cisterns were so horrifying to see. After the bomb and explosion, black rain fell. Wanting water so desperately, people opened their mouths wide to try to catch even a few drops without knowing the black rain was toxic. Massive amount of the radiation emitted from the bomb and explosion inflicted grave damage to human bodies. People within a 1 kilometer radius of the hypocenter were exposed to excessive amount of radiation, and many died within a few days. People within a 500 meters to 1 kilometer radius of the hypocenter, with no substantial injury or no burns, started showing acute symptoms of the radiation sickness within about 2 weeks. People who entered the city after the bombing to search for family, relatives, and co-workers, and those who entered for relief effort were exposed to the radiation on the ground. They developed the symptoms like the result from the direct exposure. Many died as a result. The damage caused by the radiation led to decades of human suffering. With over 40,000 military personnel, the number of the people in the city on August 6 is estimated over 350,000. Over 50,000 people were presumed to be dead on that day, and by the end of the year, 140,000 people had died. A single atomic explosion obliterated the city of Hiroshima. The atomic bomb, in an instant, transferred the city to a burned ruin. My mother was boarding at her uncle's house in Kawaramachi to go to work at Hiroshima Men's Normal School. So she was exposed to the atomic bombing in uncle's house. She gave her presentation of her own experience on August 6, 1945 at a symposium that I organized at the school, the university, and I taught 32 years. This is her script, and so I'm going to read a portion of the script in Japanese. It's kind of hard because this is her handwriting. Yeah, it's a lot like mine. 私は爆心地から900メートルのところで被爆いたしました。17歳の時でした。現在の広島大学教育学部、その当時男子師範学校に勤めておりました。前日空襲が夜9時以降にあった場合は、翌日朝10時までに出勤すればよいことになっておりました。5日の夜9時過ぎに B29 の空襲がありましたので、6日の朝8時過ぎは朝食の後片付けをしておりました。台所でお茶碗を洗っておりますと、突然に風呂や炊事場の壁がゾロゾロと落ち出して直撃を受けたと思い、その瞬間どんな風に倒れたかわかりません。 崩れ落ちたうちの下敷きになった時は、私のところだけ直撃を受けたと思い、おじのうちに下宿していたもので、おじさん助けて、と一度言い、あとは、お母さん助けて、お母さん助けて、と随分泣きました。その時、頭に浮かんだのが、七輪に残っている炭火のことで、このままでは、うちが焼けて焼け死んでしまうと思い、下敷きから這い出ねばという一心で、ひょっと頭を上に上げてみましたら、空間から頭が出て、その時一面を見ましたらびっくりしました。辺り一面真っ暗で、確かに今朝は夜が明けていたのにと錯覚を起こしました。頭は出たものの肩がひっかり、また腰がひっかり、やっと這い出た時には着ていたブラウスもズボンもボロボロに引き裂かれた状態でした。出た途端、どちらに逃げてよいかわかりませんでした。前からもしものことがあった場合、川に逃げればよいと思っていたものの、一面真っ暗で方向がわからず、あちこちと見ていたところ、川向こうに県病院の煙突が残っているのが見えたので、川に向かって歩き、土手までたどり着いたわけです。その時、自分の周りの人たちの様子に、ただただ驚くのみでした。川の土手に逃げた人たちの受けた傷のむごさはひどいものでした。一人の少年は B29 が来たのを、うちの上に上がってまともに受けた熱光線で顔、腕、手とやけどをして、人間の姿とは思えないようなものでした。顔、腕、手の皮膚がぶら下がっているのです。一人の娘さんは足のももに大きな柱が刺さり、痛い痛いと叫んでいましたが、誰も助ける人はいませんでした。やけどを負った人の数はおびただしいものでした。私は頭を切っていましたので、流れる血で顔もブラウスも真っ赤に染まっていました。どうしてこんなひどいやけどと私は周囲の人たちに聞いてみたのです。この度は B29 が特殊な爆弾を落としたのだと言ってました。ひどい爆弾を落としたものだと思いました。逃げてきた周りの人を見ると、無傷の者は私を含め2人ぐらいでした。おじに川で顔を洗いなさいと言われ、顔を洗った時の嬉しかったこと、ひどい傷を受けている人たちを目の当たりに見てきてましたので、自分の傷の軽さが嬉しかったのです。そうこうしてますと、火の手が私たちの方へ伸びてきました。まもなく夕立のごとく黒い雨が降ってきました。火の勢いが増す一方で、私は火のないところへ逃げようと思い、川に飛び込んだのです。その時、おじは、飛び込んではいけない、死ぬぞと言って止めましたが、火のないところへ逃げたい一心で飛び込んだのです。そこに流れてきた柱につかまり、川下の火のない方向へ泳いでいきましたが、火が後から追いかけてくるような状態でした。1000メートルぐらいを泳いだと思いますが、住吉橋までたどり着き、そこに2本の松の木につながれたいかだがありました。そのいかだの上に上がり、追ってくる火の手から逃れようとしたのですが、瞬く間に両側を火に挟まれて、どうにも逃げることはできませんでした。散ってくる火の粉で髪の毛などじりじりと焼け、また暑さに耐えきれず、何度川に飛び込んだか知れません。そのうち川上から数多くの死体が流れてくるのです。川に飛び込み、そのまま力尽きて亡くなった人たちなのでしょう。いかだに上がった時は私一人でしたが、後から2人来られ、3人で夕方までいかだに降りました。 喉が無性に渇いてくるのです。一人の人が水が飲みたい、水が飲みたいと言い、私は水を飲みなさんなと止めたのですが、汚い水を飲まれました。すると少しして吐かれ、またしばらくして気分が悪いと言いながらいかだから滑り落ちて、私の目の前で川に沈み込み流されていきました。おそらく亡くなられたことと思います。夕方までいかだの上におりましたが、死体が目の前を次々と流れていきました。陸軍の暁部隊から救助の兵隊たちがボート3隻でやってきて、その時私は島でもどこでもいいから火のないところへ連れて行って助けてくださいと頼みました。でも私みたいに怪我の軽い人はできないと言われ、ボートにしがみついて泣いて頼んだのですが、手を振り離されてしまい、またいかだの上に戻りました。夕方まで火に挟まれていたのですから、それは火の海にいるようなもので、まさに生き地獄でした。夕方になって元のところまで引き返し始めましたが、またびっくり。川の両側に水を求めて出てきた人がたくさんやけどをして、皮膚の色がまるで鳥のトサカの色のように変化していたのです。川を登っていきますとき、死体がゴロゴロしていました。生きている方は虫の息で、水、水、お母さんと叫んでおられました。元のところへやっと帰ってみると、おじがいて、よく生きていたねと言いました。おじ、おば、私3人で郊外の古市まで帰ることにし、その方向に向かっていく途中、防火用水に2人から3人の人が入って、重なり合うように水を求めて死んでいるのを見ました。黒焦げ、あるいは焼け腐しで、本当に顔を背けたいほど醜いものでした。私は履くものもなく裸足でずっと電車道の真ん中を歩いて帰ったのですが、火は下火になっていましたが、燃え続けているので、暑いのと生臭さが鼻をつくようでした。被爆したところから 1.5 キロぐらいのところの横側で、ひょっと後ろを振り返ってみたんです。瀬戸内海、広島湾、宇品が2、300メートルぐらいの近さに見えたのは驚きました。市内は一面焼きなほらで火の海でした。生地獄でした。被爆したところから9キロ離れた叔父の家に帰る途中、郊外に入るところあたりに竹やぶがありましたが、被災者、やけど、傷を受けた人がたくさん避難しておられました。叔父の家にたどり着いたのは夜の9時過ぎあたりでした。叔父は、よく生きて帰ってきたなぁ、と言って私を迎え入れてくれました。叔父の家に着いて広島の方を見ますと、夕焼けのように燃えて見えました。The overjoyed of being alive was short-lived. Evacuees in the neighborhood died one by one. She began to feel the fear of death. My mother started having the symptom of radiation sickness. On August 14th, the red-purple spots began to spread all over her body. Then her hair began to fall out. In only a few days, her head became bald. It was really shocking for a 17-year-old girl. She developed a high fever which lasted for many days, and then she was gravely ill. And on September 7th, she vomited blood all day long. By the evening of that day, she felt hungry and asked for food. So her mother made berry rice bowl for her. After taking 2 bites, suddenly the vomiting stopped. In a few days, the fever started dropping, and then she gradually started recovering. Her hair started growing in October, and by the end of that year, she was able to resume her normal life. That's the way she became a hibakusha. My mother lived for 57 years as a hibakusha out of 74 years of her life. Her atomic bomb experience at the age of 17 had an enormous impact on her life. When she looked back at her life, she always chose the word ikasareta. I was led to live, but not the word ikita. I lived. She saw so many deaths on that day. How she survived was more than just luck or a miracle. She believed that it was a life saved for her to live. She was grateful for the faithful life that she was allowed to live. But at the same time, she was constantly concerned with the effect of atomic bombing on her health. She was never freed from the fear of death. The meaning of her life as a kasareta reflects a mix of sense of the relief that she had survived another year, a never-ending anxiety of getting sick, and the sense of the gratitude of life she was given to live on. From time to time, her will to live on had been tested. On August 6, she survived by jumping into the river. 10 years later, in 1955, she attempted to kill herself by jumping into the river. Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings brought the end of the war. My mother suffered serious radiation sickness, which almost took her life. But she gradually recovered and resumed daily life by the end of the year. She met my father at work, and they got married in May of 1950. 2 years later, I was born. 3 years later, she got an ovary cancer. After the surgery, her doctor told her that she would no longer be able to bear a child. She was 27. After the war, hibakusha was considered as unfit for marriage. My parents had a love marriage. My father did not care about my mother being a hibakusha. But to my mother, unable to bear another child and being financial burden to her husband were too painful to take. In her mind, it would be better if she died, so my father would remarry. Hopefully he would have a son. Killing herself, taking me with her by jumping into the river, would give her husband a new life, hopefully with healthy, non-hibakusha women. My mother told me about her suicide attempt when I was 18 or 19. It made me realize the degree of the physical and psychological pain that hibakusha have suffered. In the middle of the night, I would say around 3 a.m., in the early month of 1991, I received a phone call from my mother. The phone call was different from her usual call. Her voice was filled with anger. I was stunned to hear my mother wording, enemy. Why are you staying in enemy's country? Why do you teach enemies? You know what the enemy did to me. I had never expected to hear such a word from my own mother. It made me so confused and very sad. She needed to tell me that she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. This was her second cancer, 46 years after the bombing. In a medical consultation with a renowned doctor for his research on thyroid cancer among the A-bomb survivors, she was told that thyroid cancer was very common among hibakusha. On the way home, she could not control the anger building up. Anger to the United States for the dropping the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. She has to deal with the fear of death again. This particular phone call made me wonder again how my mother had thought about my decision of going to the United States to study. I believed my mother had accepted my decision, but she wanted me to not forget the United States dropped the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. Health is the biggest concern for hibakusha. The effect of the atomic bombing on the children of the hibakusha is another big concern for hibakusha. Although I was a very energetic child, I was anemic and had a nosebleed often. My mother reminded me that I am hibaku the second generation atomic bomb survivor, and her often overreaction to my physical condition was not fun at all. 4 years after my mother's had thyroid cancer, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was 43. I live in the United States, and my mother, then a widow, lived alone in Hiroshima. So I decided better not to tell her about my cancer until I completed the treatment. My homecoming in the summer of 1995 was very intense. I had to tell my mother that I had a mastectomy and a reconstructive surgery. And most importantly, I needed to explain why I decided not to tell my mother about my cancer. But I struggled to find a better way of telling her. No matter how I explained my decision, I knew she would not easily take. And this was exactly what happened as I was afraid of. The moment I told my mother about my breast cancer, she was silent for a few minutes. Then she said, "That was my fault. 私のせいじゃね." I could not find how to defend my decision. I knew she would blame herself for my illness, as she had constantly worried about her health. Telling her it's not your fault won't convince her to believe my cancer had nothing to do with her being a hibakusha. In her 57 years of life as a hibakusha, my mother had too many physical challenges, more than 10 hospitalizations, including too many surgeries. Regardless of many illnesses, my mother was grateful for the life that she was allowed to live, although I wish she would live a lot longer. Since my mother passed away, I often take a walk along the bank of the Honkawa River. While walking, my imagination of my mother's experience flooded my mind. What was the city of Hiroshima like on that day? What was it like for my mother to survive in the river? Many hibakusha say what they experienced on that day was beyond imagination. It is true. I can hardly imagine what they saw, what they went through, and how they survived while so many others did not. When I recall my mother's talking about her experience, I find more unspoken parts in her story. Did she not want to talk about it? Was she not able to find the words to express? I am no longer able to ask her, but I am searching for the answers through the way I imagine Hiroshima on that day. Like many other hibakusha, my mother chose the word ikasareta, I was let to live, not the word ikita, I lived, in telling her life after the Hiroshima bombing. This choice of the word reflects deep meaning of hibakusha's life. I'm still trying to have a better understanding of the life of the hibakusha. In the not-so-distant future, we will be unable to listen to hibakusha about their experiences. Although we will not be able to listen to their voices directly, we can remember their stories and imagine what they would say to us. Imagine what the life of each of these hibakusha was like. As of today, the registries of the victims stored inside the stone chamber in the center for the A-bomb victims contains an over 340,000 victims' names. Imagine what each victim would tell us about their experience. Their unspoken voices are testimonies of the human tragedy on that day, and our imagination may enable us to listen to their voices. To the south of the A-bomb dome, the memorial tower to the mobilized students stands as a tribute to the approximately 10,000 students who lost their lives in working for nation's war effort during World War II. Students in the middle school, high school, and higher education were mandated for the labor service by the Student Labor Service Act of 1944. On August 6, approximately 26,800 students were mobilized from schools in Hiroshima City, and 7,200 fell victims of the atomic bombing, including 6,000 died in the building demolition. A-bomb Memorial Monument for Hiroshima's second middle school sits on the Honkawa embankment. All 321 first-year students were exposed to the atomic bomb explosion at the building demolition site, which was only 600 meters from the hypocenter. Along with their 4 teachers, they were killed instantly or died in agony within a few days' time. They were only 12 and 13 years old. Behind the monument, the names of those students are engraved along with the names of the teachers. 541 second-year students of Hiroshima Municipal Girls High School were at another demolition site, which was only 500 meters from the hypocenter at the time of the A-bomb explosion. There were no survivors. They were only 13 and 14 years old. The monument for those students, along with the 10 teachers, sit on the Motoyasu embankment. On the plate next to the monument, the students' and teachers' names are engraved. Imagine what the life of each student was like before the bombing. Imagine what their all too brief memories of the school life was like. Imagine what they did with their friends and families before the bombing. Imagine what the future of each of these students would be like. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum stores numerous personal items left behind. Among these items, tattered school uniforms, footwear, and the lunch boxes of the mobilized students are the silent eyewitness testimony of the misery of the atomic bombing. Imagine how they died. Imagine how they survived and then died in agony a few days later. Imagine the sorrow and the pain of the parents searching for the missing children who went to work on building demolition. Imagine the pain of the parents finding only personal items belong to their children, but not their remains. The city of Hiroshima was obliterated by a single atomic bomb. Although the city was transformed to a land of the rubble and corpses, 7 rivers in the city kept flowing, and these rivers were filled with the dead bodies of people in many days and weeks after. The rivers in Hiroshima witnessed hell. Imagine what an unchanging flow of the rivers today would tell us about the life, death, and tragedy in the city of Hiroshima on that day. In walking along the Honkawa and Motoyasu rivers, I often listen to the flow of the water. Sometimes I feel like talking to the river because I know the rivers have many stories to tell. There are concerns that inheritance of memories of the A-bombing will be fading away as hibakusha age and die. To prevent the memories from fading, imagination and learning from the past becomes more important for the next generation. Motomachi High School A-bomb drawing project is one of the very innovative efforts to preserve the hibakusha's memories of the A-bombing. Based on hibakusha's individual accounts of the A-bomb experience, students spent about 1 year to create their drawings. They listen to hibakusha's testimonies repeatedly. Then they take a variety of efforts to artistically create depiction of key images. This collaborative artwork project has produced over 200 drawings since 2007. While engaging in the project, the students often found it difficult to draw the scenes that they had never encountered. The hibakusha's accounts of the experience are far beyond the imagination. Yet the students relied on their creativity to depict the scenes as accurately as possible. While trying hard to reconstruct the scene, some students were troubled or discouraged by their sense of inability to complete their project. In dealing with the difficulty of imagining the human tragedy, and by overcoming their frustration in presenting accurate depiction of the scene, they gained a strong sense of the mission of conveying the reality of the atomic bombing. They believed that their drawings would play an important role for passing on the memory of Hiroshima to future generations. Their imagination and their creativity enhanced their understanding of the atomic bombing.
人々でも、この原爆の絵とか見てたら分かるんですけど、その一気に生活とかも変わってしまって、その原爆のでその被害を受けたその人々も私たちと同じように、生活を当たり前というか、いつも通りの生活を送っていたのに、このような悲惨な思いをしたっていうのを自分の言葉とか絵で伝えていけたらいいと思ってます。
私は今回この原爆の絵に携わって、もちろん証言者さんのお話を聞いて、その原爆だったり平和についてだったりとかの知識とか理解を深められたのはもちろんすごく大切、いい経験になったなと思うんですけど、私の中で一つ変わったのが伝えていくっていうことについてで、今までその小学校とか中学校で平和教育を受けてきて、伝えていかなければいけないっていうのはたくさん聞かされてたし、自分も思ってたんですけど、誰にどうやって伝えていけばいいのかっていうのはわからないままで、でも今回こうやって原爆の絵に携わって一つ気づいたのが、伝える方法は一つじゃなくて、例えば私だったら絵だったりとか、自分の得意な分野でできる分野で伝えていく、言葉だけじゃなくて文章とかだけじゃなくていろいろあるっていうのをすごく自分の中で気づいて、私たちの世代だったりとか次の世代の人にもそれを知ってもらいたいなって思います。
この間原爆の絵を描く前に資料を見るっていうことで、みんなでもう一回資料館に行ったんですね。その時に当時被爆された時に着ていた被爆者さんの服とかそういう遺品がたくさん置いてあって、この人はこういう人でこうやって行ってきますって言って出て行って戻ってこなかったけどこの遺品が残ってますとか、そういうその人のエピソードが隣に書いてあって、それを見た時にっていうのがそのエピソードとその服とかそういうお弁当箱とかそういうのを見てぐっと胸に刺さって、それでこれは自分がこの絵の中でも表現していかないといけないし、この一骨だけど一人一人に人生っていうエピソードがあって、それを思って描いていかないと絵に意味を持たせることができないと思って。
でも冷静になって考えてみたら、でも確かに相手がこういうのを表現してねって言ってるのに、そこでいや私これ表現したいからって言って出す絵はもちろん自分自身が表現したいことを出す絵っていうのも必要だけど、何かを相手が求めているもので、その相手が伝えたいものを自分自身で考えて受け取って書くっていうところのその大切さに気づいた経験がありました。
いうことは誰でも言えることで、書くはいけないとかも誰でも言えることで、それでこうやって私たちも描いてますけど、それでも 今のウクライナとロシアの状況のように変わらないことだってもちろんあると思うんです。でそんな状況に立った時にもう広島で起きた原爆の時に出た犠牲者のようになんかひどい状況になってほしくないと思ってなんか寄付をするだとかなんか支援に行くだとかっていうことをしようっていうふうに思ってほしいなって思ってます。
まず知らない人には知ってもらいたいし、なんか私の埼玉に住んでる小学3年生のいとこがこの間広島に訪れて、その時に原爆について知ってるかっていうことを少し聞いたら何も知らなくって、それがすごい言い方が合ってるか分かんないですけど危機感を覚えちゃって、なんかこのままだったら日本の中でも知ってる人が少なくなっちゃうって思って、まずなんかその原爆が落ちたっていう事実を知るところから始めて、それをなんかそこからなんか原爆今の現在どういう核兵器使おうとしてるとか、そういう今のことも知っていってもらいたくって、その上でやっぱり原爆ドームを訪れるとか、そういうことをなんか自分からやってほしいなって、世界中の人がそういうことに興味を持ってなんか知ろうっていう気持ちに。
Their experience in the project has made them a good successor of keeping the memory of Hiroshima alive. The power of the imagination is alive in those students. Their creative drawings are, indeed, powerful tools to provoke the viewer's imagination. The first nuclear test was conducted on July 16, 1945, at a test site 210 miles south of Los Alamos, New Mexico. 3 weeks later, on August 6, Hiroshima became the second nuclear test site, and then uranium bomb was exploded in the sky over the center of the city. 3 days later, on August 9th, a third test, this time of plutonium bomb, was conducted over the city of Nagasaki. The second and the third test resulted in the death of 200,000 people. Hiroshima tested decades ago that a human cannot coexist with a nuclear weapon. Imagine the hibakusha's voices and their experiences. We will keep imagining the world without a nuclear weapon. Our memory of Hiroshima through imagination will keep guiding us with a sense of the direction to the world we want to live in. う。